Okay, so we've been, as a family, meaning my family and I, have been living in Israel this year because my spouse had a study leave from his job on campus at Columbia. And I cannot even tell you how crestfallen everybody was around here when we had to cancel summer programs. So there has been like a swell over the last week of the rabbis are coming, the rabbis are coming. So we're so happy to see you. It's really something special. And I hope people, especially people who ended up coming a little bit early and you've had a lot of time here, I hope it was all worth it and wonderful and that you have a great week of learning. So for those I haven't met, though looking around the room, I think I know most of the people here. I'm Elana Stein Hain. I work at Hartman Institute in North America, but I've been working remotely this year. I'm the Rosh Beit Midrash and a senior fellow. So it just means I get to learn and teach and learn from wonderful people and with wonderful people. My topic this morning is alliance and allyship. And I just want to make clear what the motivation for this topic is. I don't think it's news to anyone, certainly anyone living in the United States, that after October 7th, we felt some sense of betrayal by those who we thought were our close allies. There was a sense of, we stood with you, how come you're not standing with us? Or we stood with you, how come you're even standing against us, right? And I don't think that that was completely new. To be honest, I think the issues of intersectionality had been bubbling for a long time, and there were times where Jews in progressive spaces were feeling a little bit, if not pushed out, a little bit alienated, a little bit uncomfortable. But I do think that there are different ways to respond to that issue. And I think one way to respond to that issue is to say, how can we rebuild those alliances? And I think that is very important. But I think there's an additional way to respond to that issue, which is, what have we learned about alliances from that experience? And so what I want to do this morning is I want to address the possibility of viewing alliances as more transactional than we have in the past. And the reason why I think that's important right now is not only because of the problem of Jews experiencing anything from discomfort to rejection on the left, but I also think there's an equally problematic issue on the right for the 26% of American Jews who skew Republican. And that is that they've allied themselves with an administration that is doing things that they don't even want, right? Maybe they want changes in immigration, but they don't want these kinds of draconian things. Maybe they want a less, quote unquote, woke society, but they're not looking at getting rid of due process or democratic norms. That's not what they were looking for. And so I think Jews, no matter whether you're the 74% of Jews that skew Democratic or the 26% of Jews in America that skew Republican, I think there's a lot of cognitive dissonance right now, and a lot of question as to what political allyship and even social allyship means and what it entails. And I think the right is not going to save us, and I think the left is not going to save us. And I think that's something that, as American Jews, certainly myself growing up in what I would call the golden age of the 80s and 90s in the tri-state area, I never thought I would say that or have to say that or think about that. But I do think democracy is beset from the right, and I do think that Israel is beset from the left. And as Zionist Jews who care about democracy, I think we're in a pickle. And I don't think that we're going to be able to have it all as the next few years come down the pike. And you may disagree with me. I'm totally all for that. I'm just sharing my view from what I've seen. And I'd rather offer a view that you find challenging and actually makes you think than offer a view that you just find comforting that doesn't actually make you think at all. Okay? So I'm going to try that today. And so my 3 steps for today. The first step is I want to look at some alliances in the 20th century, specifically the 20th century, that I think are very scary alliances and disturbing alliances, politically, that is. And I think, well, 2 of them are scary and disturbing. One of them is is what it is. It's being able to overcome political polarization. And I think that those examples actually in some way can break us out of our regularity of thinking that political polarization is something that Jews can afford to completely take part in. That's one. My second is I want to talk about what I mean by transactional allyship. And when we talk about transactional allyship, I think it's quite essential, and this is part 3, to ask ourselves, what are the ethics of transactional allyship? Because alliances where I feel completely Venn diagram overlapped with those with whom I'm allied, they don't require a lot in the realm of ethical considerations of what my parameters are, what my boundaries are, how to make sure that I maintain some distance, even within, but transactional allegiances really, really do, okay? So anybody have any questions about that? Or are anybody ready to tar and feather me about that? Or people are okay that I'm gonna try this? I'm very nervous about it because I don't think it's the way that I grew up thinking, and I think it also can feel a little bit like, oh my gosh, are you like ringing a 5-bell alarm? And I'm not sure. I think we're in process, but I just know that when I see American Jews doing things the same way they always have done, in the sense of, well, I'm gonna ally with this group and that group's gonna make it all okay, or I'm gonna ally with that group and that group's gonna make it all okay, it just doesn't seem right to me. It doesn't seem right to me. It seems like a missed opportunity to learn something from the October 7th aftermath, okay? So I wanna start, before I send you off into Chavruta, I wanna actually look together at the 3 examples of either, I'm gonna go with first surprising allyship and then troubling allyship. And I wanna start with that and then give you Chavruta to really spend the time on transactional alliances and the ethics around them, okay? Sound okay? So the first one I think is very easy, very simple. I'm very comfortable with it. And that is the political alliance between President Jimmy Carter and the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, right? What was your over-under on whether Rabbi Schneerson and Jimmy Carter would be mentioned in the same sentence by 9:08? Huh? See, I told you, keep it interesting, okay? It's interesting to note, and I'll tell you, as somebody who grew up, I was born a couple months after Jimmy Carter lost his election. Yeah, I'm that young. Crazy, right? I know. You're like, I'm not listening to her anymore. Al tistakel b'kankan ele b'ma sheyesh bo. Don't look at the bottle, look at what's in it, okay? So, anywho, and I have to say that by the age, I really do mean this, though, by like the age of 5, I knew that Jimmy Carter was horrible. That's what I knew. I heard Jews around me talking, Jimmy Carter, he pushed the Jews too much on the Egypt. I didn't know anything about what any of that meant. I just knew, I was like, whoa, that guy, I don't know, right? So it's very interesting to note that Rabbi Schneerson had a very nice relationship with him. He had a very nice relationship with him, especially as the two coalesced around the issue of education. Rabbi Schneerson was very intensely concerned with education in the American landscape writ large, and as was President Carter, also quite enthused about that or motivated by that topic, and in fact named Rabbi Schneerson's birthday as a national education holiday of some sort. So when Carter lost his election after his one term, apparently there were people who were sort of like pouncing on that loss and were very happy about that loss, right? And maybe even connected that loss to Jimmy Carter's foreign policy, okay? And here goes what Rabbi Menachem, I know, I like that you laughed and said maybe, exactly, but watch what Schneerson does. I think it's fascinating, okay? In 1981, this is a sikha, this is a public talk that he gives to his community. But such is not the way of Torah, he says. Notwithstanding any past mistakes, Torah bids us to be grateful, to acknowledge those good things which were done. In the eyes of Torah, to be an ingrate is a despicable thing, unworthy of any decent human being. And in the past administration, the outstanding achievement was the prevention of war. Oof. Meaning he does not go into, oh, well, Jimmy Carter loves education and I love education. He actually goes into what people are upset at Carter for, which relates to Iran, right? And he says he prevented war. There were instances in the past 4 years which, but for the endeavors of the president, could easily have led to war. Not only did he thus save millions of Americans from the horrors of such a consequence, but in all probability the rest of the world. And for this he deserves our thanks and gratitude. But, because there's always a qualification, a short note of caution is in order here. And by the way, I just want to say that verbiage, that phrase, a short note of caution, or that sentence, a short note of caution is in order here. I feel like I put that on a bumper sticker. Take it with you anywhere politically right now. Seriously, a short note of caution is in order here. The above acknowledgement is in no way to be construed as a retraction from my previous stand concerning the Camp David Accords, meaning peace with Egypt. I reiterate as strongly as possible that it was and remains a disaster and peril for Jews and the rest of the world. The president's part in the Accords was no doubt motivated by the hope it would bring peace, and for this he is to be commended. But the fact remains that all that has been achieved is that one side has made numerous concessions, including giving up land and essential oil supplies for no substantive return whatsoever. Such concessions merely prompt demands for further concessions, creating an even greater danger to peace. Now, there's so much that's interesting about this. First of all, the fact that he doesn't praise Carter for what Carter did for the Jews. He praises Carter for what Carter did for America, in his opinion. And then he's annoyed about he critiques Carter for what Carter did to the state of Israel, in his opinion. The second thing is, he was totally wrong about Egypt. He was completely wrong. I mean, literally, 20,000 plus Israelis made it back to Israel through Sharm el-Sheikh during the Iran war. He was wrong, right? I love seeing things like this because on every level, it is different than the way we act today. On the level of, thank you for doing something that actually people think is unpopular, and I see where it comes from. I also think what you did in this case is problematic, and I also might be wrong. I am totally enthused by this. It pulls me out of my sense of being sure, okay? So that's the first example I want to give. The second example I want to give is incredibly disturbing, and that is the political alliance between Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin, okay? What got me through the 12 days of Iran here, I'm totally serious. It's the scariest thing I've ever experienced in my life. I've never experienced anything that scary. And I literally was in Jerusalem. I was not in a place where things were hit. My husband came back. I was mad at him for at least a week until I realized that it was trauma because he hadn't been here when I went through it because he got stuck in America. I'm completely serious. I've never experienced anything like that in my life. The only thing that got me through it is I watched a series called Churchill at War. Okay, for 57 nights in a row, London was bombed by the Nazis for 57 nights in a row. They didn't have any of the detection systems. They didn't have the same kinds of miklatim. I was like, okay, people get through this. Like, we can do this. People get through this. But one of the things that I said to myself, oh my gosh, I never really thought about this as I should, is that one of the reasons why Chamberlain decided to try to appease Hitler in the early 30s. Why did he do it? A lot of reasons. They had gone through World War I. One of the reasons why he tried to appease Hitler is because he was afraid of the Soviets. And he figured that Hitler would be helpful to him against the Soviets. And Churchill said, no, 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 no. We need to actually team up with the Soviets. As soon as the Germans go against them, we need to team up with the Soviets against Hitler. Now, that is not an uncontroversial stance. And in fact, Churchill, Kidarko B'Kodesh, in his incredible way of expressing himself, says in number 2, if Hitler invaded hell, I would make at least a favorable reference to the devil in the House of Commons. Okay? Meaning, he essentially realizes that at that moment he does not have a choice but to side with a murderer against another murderer. Because siding with one murderer is going to actually save his world, even though it means giving support to somebody who is destroying other people's worlds. I cannot imagine that kind of Pyrrhic choice that he has to make. And he talks about it in number 3. Hitler wishes to destroy the Russian power because he hopes that if he succeeds in this, he will be able to bring back the main strength of his army and air force from the east and hurl it upon this island, meaning Britain, which he knows he must conquer or suffer the penalty of his crimes. His invasion of Russia is no more than a prelude to an attempted invasion of the British Isles. Right? In other words, he's trying to explain to people why he's willing to do this. He's basically saying this is a do-or-die moment, and in a do-or-die moment, you don't have good options. Okay? Very different examples, but yet another example that sort of breaks us out of our assumed neural pathways. I want to give you one more, which I think is even more disturbing in a way, and it's kind of amazing because I got to speak with the researcher for a film that has a picture on page 2 called Jose im Hasatan, ? A deal with the devil. And what that film is about is it's about the transfer agreement that the Jewish agency in Israel made with the Nazis from 1933 to 1938. How many people here have heard of the transfer agreement? Isn't that remarkable? It's a remarkable thing, right? We have the most educated Jews here, the most educated Zionists. None of us know about the transfer agreement. You know why? Because nobody wants to talk about how crazy this was. Essentially, there was the Ha'avara agreement, exactly, Haskem Ha'avara. Essentially, there was a business person named Sam Cohen who realized that Jews were not living, of course his name is Sam Cohen, it's like, come on. Who realized, he's German or Austrian, he realizes that Jews are not leaving Germany, and this is 1933. He realizes that Jews are not leaving Germany, and one reason they're not leaving Germany is because they're not allowed to take their possessions with them. And so he says, maybe I can strike a deal with the Nazi government that somehow we can get Jews to be able to bring their possessions out. How does he do it? He says, if Jews move to Palestine, hold their possessions or some percentage of their possessions in escrow, they will use that money to invest in German products for Palestine. How do you think the Strauss Company got started? How do you think many of the big capitalist companies you've heard of in Israel got started? This is how they got started. 60,000 Jews came from Germany to the land of Palestine between 1933 and 1938 and used their money, instead of boycotting the Third Reich, used their money to invest in German products and bring them to Palestine. Material goods. Holy cow. This was at the same time that Jews around the world were pleading with people to boycott the Third Reich, pleading. The Jewish agency took this deal over. Sam Cohen's own wife, who was actually a politician, activist, and social worker in Austria, she disagreed with this so vehemently. Apparently, they divorced over it some 10, 15 years later. Her whole family refused to participate in what Sam had put together. All but one were murdered in the Holocaust, her side of the family. We're talking about an impossible choice. An impossible, impossible choice. And it turns out the researcher of this film is a Strauss. Her grandparents came through the Ha'avara. And I said to her, what do you think about it? She's like, I don't know if I would have agreed with it at the time. but I also wouldn't be alive likely if my grandparents hadn't done that. That's my third example. Now, do I think that we're living in Nazi Germany and then, no. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to remind us that the kind of clear, full Venn diagram alignment of political alliances that has become in some ways the norm in American life is not something that has always been the norm, and certainly is something that needs to be rethought in moments that are really turbulent and uncertain. That is my point in bringing all three of these examples. It is actually to unseat us from our assumptions and to unsettle us from what we think we know. And for me, where that goes, and this is chavruta, where that goes is I want to understand, is there a type of political alliance, a type of even social alliance that is meaningful and real and based on values, but is not hook, line, and sinker, all in, we're best friends, I can always count on you. And I think that that, in some ways, is what alliances are supposed to be, politically and socially. And what's difficult about it is thinking about the ethics. So are you saying that I should go ally myself with the worst possible I'm not saying that. I'm just saying there's probably some daylight between allying myself with the people I've always allied myself with and also seeing something else. So are you saying that I can't ally myself anymore with the progressive left because the progressive left in anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism has been, I'm saying, no, just figure out how to be transactional about it and what your ethics are around it. What's too far and what's not too far and what, right? Meaning it's actually something that should be used in all directions, in my opinion, okay? It's just a different way to think about allyship. Okay, is everybody doing okay now? Okay, great. So let me just walk you through the sources that you're going to look at and then go enjoy learning together. Okay, so 5 to 8 are all discussions about different kinds of relationships. And I think it's particularly interesting to consider only number 7 is actually talking about political coalitions, but it's interesting to consider how these might be mapped onto political alliances and social alliances, 5 to 8. And I would say numbers 9 to 12 are really trying to get us into the ethical question. That once you're making alliances that may have some daylight between you and your allies, are there important parameters to keep in mind? And I would say that number 9 focuses on the parameters of not becoming what you loathe, not becoming what you deeply disagree with, what you values-wise are deeply committed to being against. And numbers 10 to 12, I think, all deal with the problem of dirty hands, meaning the problem of getting one's hands dirty in trying to be politically savvy, effective, and successful, okay? Now, you might say to me, and I think it's worth doing, and I think we're gonna talk about it at the shiur itself, you might say to me, well, you chose number 10, but you also could have chose this, that, and the other source as well. The reason why I chose number 10, and you'll understand it when I get there, is because I think number 10 is the problem of dirty hands in a way that other sources might make us feel better and say, no, 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 don't get your hands dirty. You won't get your hands dirty. It's fine. As long as you live by your values, you'll never have to get your hands dirty. I don't think that is true. Again, you can disagree with me. I'm just telling you what I think, because I think that's my job. Okay? Any questions about any of this? Yes, please. 60,000. But how much money went to the Third Reich? I don't know. A lot. A lot. Right? So how many Jews died at the hands of the Third Reich. And by the way, and this is what Dr. Tzabari told me, she's the researcher on the film, who's an anical, right? She's a grandchild of, she's an anical, meaning the Yiddish, she's the grandchild of one of these people. This is her yichus, this is her pedigree. She said to me, she's like, Elana, I want you to compare. I called her, we had a great conversation. It was like talking to a ghost, you know what I mean? Meaning, because her other alternative of her life was that I wouldn't be talking to her, right? And she said to me, she's like, I just want you to compare the socialist economy that was being developed here with the German capitalist market that grew through the Havara agreement. She's like, Tel Aviv is the Havara agreement. And I'm like, whoa. I'm like, I'm never going to Tel Aviv again. Do you know what I mean? And she's like, and if you think anybody knows, by the way, the Israelis in the room, I have some Israelis in the room. What do you know about the Heskem Havara? That much, right? That much. Tel Aviv is the Havara. At the end of the film, they show the 5 or 6 different major conglomerate corporations that came out of this. Jose im Hasatan, question mark. You can find it online. Yeah, it's a short film. It's something else. I told them they need to put it in, they need to have it in English. Yes? Yeah. Wow. Anything else? Other questions or comments? Right. When you're making a deal with the devil, do you become the devil yourself? You know what? Anita and her family thought so. Sam did not. Right? And I said to Dr. Tzabari, I said, how do you know that Anita didn't agree with it? And she said, because the grandchildren talk about the legacy of how much they know their grandparents fought about this and that it ultimately led to their divorce. I was like, there's no letter, she's like, no, this is the family lore, is that this pulled them apart ultimately. I think there's some other stuff there also once I started digging a little bit more. Let's just say, I don't think the romance inside the marriage was as steamy as the romance outside the marriage. Let's just put it that way. Not on her side. Yes. Gail, did you have a question or a comment? And that's not Motzi Shemer, meaning that is, yes. Gail. Wow. Not for this program, obviously, but so now it would be very interesting to see somebody do some historical work. Totally. And contrasting some of the different programs. To get Jews out. Like my father-in-law's brother went to England and he was 16. What were the different things that were happening to try to get Jews out? Wow. If anybody knows a historian or knows a historian, tell them. Well, one thing I'll tell you is, I did put it on page 3. People were protesting the Havara agreement and the fact that the Jewish agency engaged in the Havara agreement. And here you find, this is unbelievable, it's printed in Haaretz in 1933, okay? Saying, Al tig'u b'transfer, do not put your hands on transfer, meaning let transfer happen, it's necessary, right? So, whoa. Okay, other questions or comments about Chavrutza materials in specific? So section 3, basically what I have, and I don't know if you're going to get past section 2. But, no, you're right, it's called section 2. I don't know if you're going to get past what's called section 1 here. Section 2, I basically have three different thinkers that are pushing us in a certain way to be able to differentiate parts of our identity. So Jonathan White, for example, is talking about the ethics of political alliance And it's not so dissimilar from number 7, but I happen to think number 7 expresses it in a much stronger way. But the ethics of political alliance, he's thinking about the question of, does there need to be full overlap, or could there be different parts of you? And he's talking about Britain, by the way. Then Alan Levinson is talking about what it means to be a cosmopolitan Jew, which I think most American Jews are, and being a cosmopolitan Jew and a kind of at-homeness. And Trude Rice Rosemarin, who's the founder of The Spectator and editor of The Spectator for decades, she has this, what a screed, America is Not Babylonia, from 1953, where she talks about the danger of American Jews thinking that they are Americans, not just first, but first, second, and third. Oh gosh. Okay, so if you get to section 2, have a great time. Otherwise, we'll get to it here. All right, enjoy your learning, everybody. Good? Interesting? Thought-provoking? Okay, good. I'm so glad. Okay, so I want to just remind us, not everybody was in the room for the introduction. Some people had to travel here from different places, and they just got here a little bit late. But even for those who were, I want to just remind us of what we're trying to do today. We're trying to do 3 things. Number 1, we're trying to ask ourselves, challenge ourselves to think a little bit differently about our assumptions regarding political alliances and political activism. And we started that process by looking at 3 examples of political alliances, 2 of which I think were very disturbing, but 3 examples of political alliances that were a little bit surprising, or just the way that people engaged were a little bit less linear than we might have assumed or presumed. The second is the suggestion that thinking about politics differently or thinking about political activism differently, to my mind, means being more aware of how transactional these things actually are. Not that we're making them more transactional, but that they are actually by their very nature, things, the stuff of transaction. And the third is, if by their very nature, political alliances are the stuff of transaction, and let me make it clear, that doesn't mean that I don't think people who are longtime allies do not also have friendships. I know that they do. It doesn't mean that I don't think that local relationships are important and can cross different party lines. I think they can. But if we are actually to recognize that there is something transactional about political alliances, how do we develop parameters, ethical parameters, about engaging? And I made no secret of the fact that I think that we need to think about this both left and right. We need to think about this when we are in coalition with people whose values lead them down some of the same paths as us on the progressive side, but also lead them against the state of Israel on the progressive side. We need to be thinking transactionally. I think we need to be thinking transactionally with people who are super pro-Israel on the right, but have other ideas that we find very dangerous and problematic. And we need to think about how to be transactional there too. So that's the stuff that I gave you of Chavruta. And what I want to do is I want to go through it, make some comments, and I think the most important thing is actually our conversation together and probing what that actually looks like, right? Because if somebody walks away and is like, oh, Elana thinks that we should all be in league with Stalin, that would definitely be the wrong takeaway, right? And if somebody walked away and said, Elana thinks we should all be in league with anti-Zionists, that would also be the wrong takeaway, okay? So meaning the wrong takeaway in terms of what I'm interested in people walking away with, okay? Meaning, no, I'm serious, meaning the wrong takeaway in terms of what I think people are. Okay, so I started with you on Rabbi Yoshua ben Prachia's comment in Pirkei Avot, and the comment, I think there are two pretty deep ways to read this, and I read it one way, and I have a friend who reads it another, who sensitized me to this, but I read it as kind of concentric circles, right? Presumably, we're talking about a rabbinic society. And in fact, Pirkei Avot, the goal of Pirkei Avot is to teach people how to be good students, right? It's trying to offer foundations for a rabbinic rather than priestly leadership class. And in that, the most important influence on you, or your closest influence, should be your Rav. You should all be very happy about that, right? Your most important influence should be your teacher. Your next important influences should be your friends. And the third, I don't know if you would say influence or engagement or interaction, that's a little further out, would be Kol Hadam, people who you meet. Now, does that mean that every person who you meet, who you give the benefit of the doubt to, you're going to end up being koneh or kona as a chaver? You're going to end up acquiring them as a friend? Not necessarily. You might find out that your perspective on them was unwarranted. The benefit of the doubt that you gave them is unwarranted. You might find out they're actually not a very good influence on you, but you started out with kind of an open mind. So that's the way I read this. A friend of mine actually offered the opposite reading. He said, well, actually, I think what it's trying to show you are all the people who can teach you things. The best teacher of all is that outside rung of Kol Adam, right? Ezehu chacham halomed mikol adam. Who's really wise? Someone who learns from everyone. So really what this is trying to say is, we don't want you just learning from your rabbi. We don't want you just learning from your friends. We want you learning from everybody. And if you can give the benefit of the doubt, then you'll learn from everybody. And I think that both of these are really important, actually, because the first read emphasizes how important it is to actually be committed to something and a way of life and a thought and people who guide you in that way of life. And the second reading is really a commitment to recognizing that there's a lot of truth out there from a lot of different kinds of people. And I think both are really, really important. Then I see what the Rambam Maimonides did with this. And what Maimonides did is he basically took Aristotle and said, well, let's actually collapse some of these categories. But I still think that the collapsing of the categories, the different categories that we're talking about here, still live between the everybody has some truth to those who have the same committed, lifestyle and approach as you do. I think actually in some ways that's what Aristotle in some ways is going for. So let's just take a look together and just be that much more engaged. By the way, who here finished all of section 1, Roman numeral 1? Okay, that's great. Who here got through 9? Is there anybody who didn't do number 10? Is the question. Oh, okay, so maybe? Is that a hand or that's a half a hand? Okay, so I think we're basically all on the same page. That's great. So we're gonna go through it. I'm gonna try to frame it. Even though you learned it already, we're gonna go through it. And then we're gonna have a conversation about it, meaning questions, comments, answers, okay? So Aristotle, I think, is really fascinating. Because when Aristotle talks about friendship, I could leave it as friendship. But I actually think that in our modern parlance, he's not just talking about what we would call friendship, right? He's talking about different types of relationships in the world that we carry. So there are 3 kinds of friendship. Friends, we're in number 6. Friends whose affection is based on utility do not love each other in themselves, but insofar as some benefit accrues to them from each other. And similarly with those whose friendship is based on pleasure. For instance, we enjoy the society of witty people, not because of what they are in themselves, but because they are agreeable to us, which is probably why so many comics have such intense self-doubt. Because if they don't make you laugh, you're not actually there for them. You're there for what they can do for you, right? It's actually a very transactional relationship, even if you love them, okay? So we have utility and pleasure. Utility and pleasure are what are we getting out of the other person. Hence, in a friendship based on utility or on pleasure, a person loves their friend for their own good or for their own pleasure, and not as being the person loved, but as useful or agreeable. Friendships of this kind are easily broken off, right? So the first thing he says about these kinds of friendships is that they are not about the person in and of themselves, they're about what you get from them. Second, these can be temporary, right? They can be easily broken off in the event of the parties themselves changing. For if no longer pleasant or useful to each other, they cease to love each other. And utility is not a permanent quality. It differs at different times. Hence, when the motive of friendship has passed away, the friendship itself is dissolved, having existed merely as a means to that end. I understand that this may be not the type of friendship we're looking for in general in life. If my kids had friends only of utility or pleasure, I would say we need to work on that. But I do think that we need political alliances of this type. Meaning, I think we need political alliances where we recognize we're in the alliance for what we get out of it. It could be as Jews, it could be as Americans. We're here to accomplish something. It doesn't mean that it has to be everlasting if it ceases to have the utility that it had. We need to actually be able to get something out of it. I don't think that's the only kind, but we'll get there. Now, a question that I have, and this is when we get to the Rambam, is utility for what? Because utility is not something vacuous, right? Meaning if the utility is protecting democracy, that's not the same as I'm friends with you because you can change a tire, right? Unless I live in a place where my tire constantly, I don't know, right? But utility is not something that's necessarily vacuous. So I want to think a little bit more about that because I think when we talk about utility, it makes it sound like, well, how much lunch money are you going to give me? And actually, it could be, how are you going to help me protect the values that I care about and maintain society the way I think society has to be maintained? That is also a form of utility. Who can help me do that? Right? And are there people who can't help me do that, who are inimical to that idea? They are not of that same utility, okay? The perfect form of friendship, though, he goes on, is that between the good and those who resemble each other in virtue. For these friends wish each other alike, the other's good in respect of their goodness, and they are good in themselves. But it is those who wish the good of their friends for their friends' sake, who are friends in the fullest sense, since they love each other for themselves and not accidentally. Hence, the friendship of these lasts as long as they continue to be good, and virtue is a permanent quality. Now, I read this and I find it very confusing, because I really think that a lot of the allyship that we have, social allies, political allies, is because we really believe we have a version of the good and you share that version of the good. And then suddenly you see, well, wait, you share this part of the version of the good, but not that part of the version of the good. So I think part of what's confusing is it would almost be easier if it was a Hitler-Stalin pact. You're like, I'm desperate, and so this is what I need to do. But actually, you're sort of like, wait, we were on the same side, and now we're on the same side on this, but we're not on the same side on that, right? Take the Zoran Mamdani example. In New York, 20% of Jewish New Yorkers ranked Zoran Mamdani, right? Because they said, we are on the same side as this, and some of them probably weren't were on the same side in terms of Zionism in Israel also, but I think plenty weren't, and they said, well, we share some. So I think it's very confusing, and I don't want to be simplistic to say, okay, now we go from the highest level to the lowest level of friendship. But I do think that there has to be some taking into account of, wait, alliances are temporary. They are not forever if actually we don't share the same values anymore, and you aren't of that utility in being able to allow that commitment. I have to tell you, I think that's what happened to us after October 7th. I think people looked at us and said, you don't share our values. We thought you were this third type. You don't share our values, so we don't want you in our, right? It's the same thing. So I'm saying to myself, well, wait, from the beginning, you're not actually going to share all of the values, right? I want to think about that. You're not actually going to share all the values. And I think that's very, very difficult because it lined up for a long time. So when my friend Jacob Feinspan introduced me to Bernice Johnson Regan, who people might know, Sweet Honey from the Rock, Okay, that's her. She was, I'm telling you, was an American song leader, composer, professor of American history, curator at the Smithsonian, and social activist. In 1960s, she was a founding member of the Freedom Singers, organized by the SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, et cetera, et cetera. She founded the all-black female a cappella ensemble Sweet Honey in the Rock, okay, based in Washington, D.C. I thought this was brilliant. Coalition work is not work done in your home. Your alliance is not your home. It's not your home. And part of what has happened, both left and right, is that Jews have become convinced that whatever their political alliances were, that's their home. No, anti-Zionism is not your home. Anti-democracy is not your home. These are not your homes. You are allowed to have a disparate home where you say, these are the things we believe in, it doesn't fit neatly into here or here, and now I have to figure out how I'm going to ally myself in different places for different purposes, right? That's where I'm sitting. And so I like what the Rambam does with it, because what the Rambam does with it is he also pulls you in this way. He takes Aristotle, and he suggests, actually, when Yoshua ben Prachia says, Aseh lecha rav uknei lecha chaver, that's actually redundant, right? The chaver that I want you to have is your teacher. And that's your home. That's the only home you have, right? Everything else is give people the benefit of the doubt. But you also have a home that's yours. And that's what the Rambam does differently from Aristotle, is he pushes, because he's doing a Perush on Pirkei Avot, whereas Aristotle is not. That would be impossible in terms of the order and the knowledge set, right? But in a certain sense, he collapses the categories and says, you have home, and then you have everything else. And be comfortable in that home. And it's funny because I find a lot of rabbis, and Rabbi Risha Groner and I were talking about this. Where are you, Risha? Yeah. We were talking about this. By the way, whose first time is it at Hartman this summer? Oh, amazing. See, Risha, you're way not the only one. Way not the only one. This is very exciting. So we were talking about this. What does it mean to tell Jews to be more Jewish and identify more Jewishly during these times of uncertainty? I think part of that, actually, the framing has to be, you have a home. You feel homeless, you have a home. You're not homeless. You have a home. It's called Judaism and Jewish identity. You're allowed to feel at home and not just embattled all the time, right? So there's something very powerful about it, I think. But now we get to the scary part. Because the scary part, when things don't align, is trying to figure out what your ethics are going to be around that. Now, I can't sit with a group of rabbis and not learn the Torah inside. Sorry. I know that you looked at it already, but we still have to learn it together, if that's okay, because I want to make certain points as we're going through it. First of all, anybody here learning Daf Yomi? So Daf Yomi is in Masechet Avodah Zarah. You probably saw this a few weeks ago and just blew past it. Little did we know, you probably didn't blow past it. I know, the people in here didn't blow past it. But what I'm saying is, like, the depth of it is actually kind of startling, especially because as we were talking, just a minute ago, Sigalit Ur and I, we were just talking about how when you look at the different examples of Antoninus and Rebbe in Sifrut Chazal, in rabbinic literature, it's so positive for Rebbe. Rebbe comes off as such a hero, like he's teaching Antoninus, who we think is probably the Emperor Caracalla. He's teaching Antoninus so much about Judaism, and here Rebbe doesn't come off very well at all, right? And it's a very weird, almost like scratch on the record player, like what happened here? Almost that people don't want to believe that this is a satire of Rebbe, but that's the only way that I can read it. So I want to look at a few examples of where I think Rebbe goes off the rails and how that might be helpful for us in thinking about transactional political relationships. So Amar le Antoninus le Rebbe. Antoninus comes to Rebbe, which, by the way, I think is interesting. It's introduced as Rebbe did not initiate the relationship. Actually, Antoninus came to him and basically gave him a riddle to solve. And the riddle to solve was a riddle of, how do I accomplish my interests and Jewish interests, right? I want my son Severus to be able to rule after me, which is unusual. It's not supposed to be dynastic. You have to ask for it. V'titaved Tiberia Kalanya, and I want Tiberias, which is a Jewish colony, I want it to be a colony, meaning I want it to be tax-free, meaning I want to help the Jews and I want to help myself. And if I tell my Senate one of these things, Avdi, they'll do it, but Shrelo Avdi. If I ask them to do both of these things, they won't. Now, let me ask you a question. You're Rebbe in that situation. Of course you're going to talk to the king, right? Of course you're going to talk to the king. The king is asking you, how are you going to stand up for the interests of the Jews? How are you going to make sure that the Jews become tax-free? So he has to do something. It's a little tricky because it's not like Antoninus came to him with something that's straightforward. He comes to him with a little bit of a little riddle, like how high can you jump to make this work? But he does, right? Aiti Gavra, so he brings a guy, Arkavei Chavre, he puts him on his friend's shoulder, V'yayev leYona le'iloi biyadeh, and he puts a dove in the upper one's hand, V'amar le'letatai, and he says to the one on the bottom, Emer le'iloi denafrach Yona min yadeh, go tell the guy up top to let go of the Yona, to let go of the dove. Amar, okay. So Antoninus says, Shma mina hachi ka'amarli, this is what I'm understanding from this whole game of charades. At bai minayu de asferis brigim loch tchotai, you're saying I should ask the Senate to have my son Severus rule after me. Ve'emeli la'asferis te'avid Tiberia Kalanya. And then I should tell Severus that he should make Tiberias a colony, make it tax-free, help the Jews. Got it. Now, can I ask you a question? Anybody here ever see the back of a highlights magazine where you're supposed to circle everything that's wrong? If you haven't, it's great fun. You should totally check it out, okay? Back of a highlights magazine, what is wrong with this? Off the bat, what is wrong with this? Okay, he may or may not do what he asks, but to be honest, he can't control what Antoninus is going to do, and Antoninus can't control what Severus is going to do, and you could say that Rebbe is playing the odds, right? He's trying to give an acceptable answer to Rebbe, right? So you might say we notice, and maybe this is not something wrong, this is just something endemic, you notice that there's a right answer and a wrong answer, and Rebbe knows that he wants to try to give the right answer, right? Anything else? Yeah, please.
Why doesn't he just give him the advice? Why does he have to make it a whole...
Yeah, what's this secret language that they have? I don't know if I would circle that on the back of a highlights magazine, but I would dot pencil it. It's a strange thing. It's a strange thing. So is he Antoninus' secret advisor? Is a secret? Is a secret. And you know what? You keep going in that Gemara, and I didn't give you everything. They only talk in codes. They only talk in codes. And then when we get to the secret cave, no one should be surprised. Okay? Was there another comment? Yeah. It's a fair question, right? It's, hey, Jew, why didn't he put the Jewish interests first, meaning Rebbe? Why he didn't answer? Now, I actually think this is a great problem because maybe Rebbe couldn't. So this is the best that he can do. And of course, we're all going to have an opinion on how he did because we weren't the ones who had to do it, right? But watching from afar, he could have done this and he should have done that and he shouldn't, right? But the point is, there's something here already that is a little tricky. There's something a little tricky, yeah.
It's a question of the purity of abundance of God. Why, when you go to this patient,
Correct.
you ask for Yahweh and you don't ask for
Correct. There's a recognition here, Antoninus is not my friend. This, I think, is very important. Rebbe realizes Antoninus is not my friend. And I want to try to get something for the Jewish people, and even if it's a little secretive, and even if it's not the best, but there's something not great. Then we get to, and it keeps going, they have a few more of these charades back and forth, where Rebbe is asked for advice, and it has to be secret. Then we get to our cave, okay? Havaleahi Nikirta, there was a cave, Dahava Ayla Mibeit Libeit Rebbe, this is more secrecy, right? Listen, Jew, I'm on your side, but I can't be seen with you in public, right? I can't be seen with you in public, but don't worry, we're, okay? So we have this secret passageway. Kol yom havamaite trei avde. Every day he would bring two avadim, he'd bring two servants, chad katle abava de Rebbe. One of them he would kill at the entrance of Rebbe's house, so nobody knew he was there. V'chad katle abava de Beit. And then the other one he would kill when he came back to his own armon, to his own palace, so that nobody would know that he was there. Amar Lein, he says, Be'idna da'atena lo nashkach gever kamach. When I come, I don't want anybody to be here with you, Rebbe. Yom Echad Ashkechel Rabbi Chanina Bar Chama de Havayativ. One day, another Jew is there. In fact, another rabbi is there. Now, why would Rebbe ask another rabbi to show up if Antonino said, I don't want anybody here. Maybe it was an accident, maybe it was a test, but guess what? The test goes as follows. Antonino says, I told you, I don't want anybody else here. You cannot expand this circle. This is as far as it gets. And in fact, a fellow Jew's life is endangered by this relationship, right? Amarle, late din bar inish, no, he's not human. Amarle, ema leila hu avda de gani abava de kaim velete. Okay, if he's not human, this guy, tell him to go tell the guard who's sleeping over there, who's dead, sleeping over there to come up and so now who's in danger? Hanina bar Chama is now in danger because of Rebbe's relationship. Has Rebbe done anything for the Jews between then and now so far? We got them to be a tax-free. So there is actually one great line in there, which is every day, and you have to go back to the Gemara. You're going to teach this, so you have to find it. Okay? Every day, Antoninos would give a sack of money to Rebbe, and Rebbe would say, I don't need this money. Well, buddy, you're not in this for yourself. You're in this for the Jewish people. It's like, I don't need, he says, yes, you do, because at some point, the taxes are going to come back, and your children are going to have to pay my children, right? And get this, Rebbe, the language that he uses when he says, I don't need this money, is he says, Eat li tuva, which is an echo of Esav saying to Yaakov, Yesh li rav, I've got enough. Something's going on with Rebbe that is not good, okay? It's not good. And now there's a fellow Jew who is in danger, okay? And so in the end, okay, he's able to revive him, his life is saved, and I told you, right, when I come, I don't want anybody here, okay? And then we see how much Antoninos loves Rebbe. Kol yom ahava mishamesh leRebbe. Every day he would serve Rebbe, machile, mashkele, he would give him food and drink. Again, in private. Ki hava bay Rebbe lemesak lepuria. When Rebbe went to his bed, hava gachin kame puria, he would literally lean in front of the bed. Amrle, he would say, sakil vay leparech, you should walk on me to get to your bed. Yeah, wow. Amrle, he says, lava orach arla zalzuli b'machuta kulahat. That's not appropriate. You're the king. That's not appropriate. So he says, Amrle, mi yisimeni matzat achtecha le'olam haba. I should be like your mattress in the world to come. Like, I'm not even worthy of you. This is the guy who's murdering people every day. And then he turns to people every day in order to see Rebbe. And then he turns to him, Amarle says, Atina la'alma de'ate, am I going to go to the world to come? Now, I want you to think to yourself, you are the emissary of the Jews, who Rebbe can be considered to be. He is wealthy, he is learned, he is the emissary of the Jews. What do you answer to that question? This is a man who murders 2 people every day to see you, who loves you apparently, but nobody else is allowed to come in to be there, endangers other Jews, but also wants to keep the Jews in their place, but also wants to give them tax-free living. What do you say to him? Are you going to go to the world to come? What do you think? Yes, of course. Yes, of course. If you heard somebody do that today to a certain president, what would you say? You would say, how could you do that? Sell out. Sell out. Okay? I think Rebbe is being critiqued here. I do not think that I don't think this is meant to be acceptable. In the Gemara, Amarle says, Atina la'almadate, am I going to go to the world to come? Amarle says, He says, yes. Amarle v'haktiv, but don't you have a pasuk that says, Lo yes sarid lebeit Esav? There won't be a remnant to the house of Esav. And he says, I don't actually know if he says it, right? But oseh ma'aseh Esav, only if he acts like Esav. Is that Rebbe saying to him, only if you act like Esav, so stop acting like Esav? It's a pretty thin rebuke. Is that the narrator who's actually saying that? What's actually being said here? But certainly what happens is, literally Rebbe is in league with a murderer. It is endangering other Jews, and he is telling the guy he's going to the world to come. And you know what? Maybe it's just realpolitik, and he's just doing what he needs to do to get by. But then the editors, in their brilliance, put right next door the story of Onkelos. Onkelos the convert. Onkelos bar Kalonimus Igayer, he converts. Shadar Kesar Gunda de Ramaya Batre, and so the Caesar sends a group of people to come get him. Mashchinu Bekrai Igayer. So you know what he did? He talked to them in scripture, and they also converted. Hadar Shadar Gunda de Ramaya Harina Batre, he sent another group. Amarlu, lo tamer levelomidi, don't talk to him. Kahabu shakli ve'azli, when they came, Amar lahu ema lahu milta be'alma. He says, let me just tell you a quick thing. Nifiora naket nura kame apifiora. He says, usually you have the minor leader holding the torch in front of the senior leader. Apifiora leduksa, and so on down the line. The lower is always holding for the higher. Duksa lehegemona, hegemona lekoma. Koma mi naket nura mikami inshe. Would you ever find the koma? Would you ever find the highest one carrying a torch before people? Amile lo, they said, no way. Amalehu, he says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu nakat nura kami Israel. You know that God carries the torch in front of the Jewish people. Tichtiv, as it says in the Exodus, V'Hashem holech lifnehem yomam v'gomer. God goes before them in a cloud in the day and a torch in the night. Igar kulhu, they all convert. When you put Rebbe next to these stories, where over and over again, it isn't just that Onkelos refuses, it's that Onkelos continues to express how the essence of Jewish faith is care for human beings. God is the one who holds the torch in front of us. God is the one who guards us with the mezuzah on the outside of our door, right? That it's actually going in the opposite direction. The role of a leader is to guard the little guy. That's the role of the leader, not vice versa. Now, why couldn't Rebbe have said something like that to Antoninus at any point? Was it possible for him to say anything like that? And then after telling you this Onkelos story, that's when the Gemara goes back and says, by the way, Rebbe and Antoninus became two peas in a pod. Vayomer Hashem la shnei goyim bevitnech, the top of page 9, God says to Rebecca, you have two nations in your womb, Esav and Yaakov, meaning Edom and the Jewish people, meaning Rome and the Jewish people, meaning Antoninus and Rebbe. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, Al tikre goyim ela geim. Don't read it as two nations, rather two prideful ones. Zeh Antoninus for Rebbe, because they're both rich and they have food at their table that they share. That's an indictment. That's an indictment. And so when I look at the ethics of transactional allyship, which cares about realpolitik very much, I do ask myself two things. One, is there a way not to become that which you think is a problem? And two, is there a way not to lie about what Judaism is? Is there a way not to lie about what Judaism is, even in the face of people who do not share those values, whether right or left? I'm okay with transactional politics as long as it doesn't get past there, for me, okay? So that's my first point. My second point that I want to make in terms of the ethics is, it doesn't matter if I'm honest about what Judaism says or doesn't say, and it doesn't matter if I don't become the thing that I loathe. Part of what matters is that I'm probably strengthening the thing that I think is a problem, which means my hands are dirty. They are. That is not a new problem or phenomenon in politics. And so what I chose, instead of going straight to Michael Walzer, is I didn't choose, I'll tell you all the things I didn't choose. These were the runners-up. You ready? Runner-up. Aseh doche lo ta'aseh. If you have a positive commandment and a negative commandment, and it is not possible to fulfill them both, you should fulfill the positive commandment, even though you're going to have to override the negative commandment. Why didn't I use that? Number one, there isn't a great example. The best example in the Gemara is if somebody, let's just say the positive commandment is doing a brit milah and the negative commandment is not cutting something that's tzara'at. So yeah, you see what I'm saying? Like that's really, you don't see what I'm saying? Okay, thanks. Okay. And if we have a mohel here, if we have anybody, okay? It's like you're the mohel and then you see that there's tzara'at there and you're like, oh, but I'm not allowed to cut tzara'at. I don't think that happens so often. So the real reason why I didn't do it, Is everybody okay? It was like, first Rabbi Schneerson and Carter. Now this. I am stumped. Okay. The reason why I didn't include it is because it's too easy. It's too easy. Also, if you continue to learn the sugya, you will find out that if something is both an aseh and a lo ta'aseh, a positive commandment and a negative commandment, you can't override it for a positive commandment. It's not so simple, okay? It's too easy. Did you want to say something about this, Aaron? We'll get back to Rebbe. Don't worry, there's going to be so much time to talk. Okay. No, I'm serious. That's my goal. I just want to really lay it out, and then let's talk. The second, the runner-up, was mitzvah ba'avera. You're not allowed to use a stolen lulav because that is a mitzvah that only came to pass as a result of a transgression. I think that's also too easy. I would love it. I would love it if in politics we never had to get our hands dirty. I don't think it's possible. I'm going to argue this way. You ready? I'm going to do Mamdani, Lander, and Cuomo. You ready? Any New Yorkers in the house? You vote for Mamdani, your hands are dirty with anti-Zionism. You vote, what? It's my argument. Mamdani, this New York, the whole world doesn't revolve around New York. He says he doesn't think it's so clear. That's fine. We may differ on that, okay? I think it's enabling anti-Zionism. I'm going to just say it out, okay? This is my view. It doesn't have to be your view. And it's not recorded. It doesn't matter. Everybody's good. You vote for Cuomo, your hands are dirty because you voted for a sexual harasser who's incredibly corrupt, right? He's not the sexual harasser. There are a lot of people who are trying to get that moniker, sadly, okay? I vote for Adams, but I'm voting for a guy who Turkey controls. My hands are dirty no matter what I do. Lander, your hands aren't dirty. It didn't work. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, I'm saying you threw away your vote. But I'm saying, I understand why. But I think my point is, I don't think that having just, mitzvah babi avera, you can't do a mitzvah that's going to, it's not true in politics. It's not true. And so I wanted to actually look at something that was going to smack us in the face. And I think the concept of avera lishma kind of smacks us in the face. The idea that one might actually commit a violation for a good reason, for an actual good reason. And I just gave you an example of one mayoral primary race where, and not just primary race, where I don't think anybody's hands are clean, or if your hands are clean, you weren't politically effective. Do you know what I'm saying? That's why I don't think this is a crazy thing that I'm saying. It's how much do I have to say I don't think it's crazy if it actually means that in my head, I can't believe that this is where we are? But it is, okay? So the concept of avera lishma shows up among other places in the Gemara in Nazir, 23b, Kaf Gimel Amud Bet. Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, and I excised because originally it's Gidola avera lishma mi mitzvah shelo lishma. An avera, a transgression for the right purpose, is a bigger deal. It's better than a mitzvah. And then the Gemara is like, no, that's not better than doing a mitzvah for the wrong purpose. Do a mitzvah for the wrong purpose. Do me a favor, right? So instead, it ultimately comes up with Gidola avera lishma ke mitzvah shelo lishma. Doing a transgression for the right reasons is as good as doing a mitzvah for the wrong reasons, right? Which is a fascinating and dangerous concept. Very, very dangerous. Dichtiv, as it says, Tivorach mi nashim Yael, eshet chever hakeni, mi nashim ba'ohel tivorach. Yael, the wife of Chever the Kenite, should be blessed more than or among the women in the tent because she kills Sisera, right? Man nashim sheba oel, who are the women in the tent? Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, right? Our four mothers. And Rabbi Yochanan says, what avera, what transgression did she do? She was a married woman. Sheva bi'ilot ba'al oto rasha be'ota sha'a. Actually, Sisera slept with her 7 times, and he learns that from a pasuk that says, Bein ragleha kara nafal shachav, and it says nafal and shachav over and over again. You have 7 times, okay? But the point is here, she's read as, oh my gosh, this is a married woman who commits adultery in order to save the Jewish people. Now, what I think is very interesting is this Gemara doesn't make it seem like there's any fallout. But I think it's quite important when you look at thinkers about the concept of Aveira Lishma, they actually do think it's a problem. You have to do it, and it's a problem anyway. So Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen, for example, who everybody loves to quote as the guy who's so antinomian and is like, just do anything. He's the guy who says Aveira Lishma requires kapara. It requires penance. Okay? Mikol makom tzrichim kapara al aveira sheba. Regardless, there needs to be some penance for the sin within it. V'gam Eliyahu Bahar HaKarmel. Even look at Elijah on Mount Carmel, because what did he do? He challenged the Nivi'ei Baal, the false prophets, to a korban off, a sacrifice off. And none of them were allowed to be giving sacrifices outside of the sanctuary. And yet he did it because he had to do it. So Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen says, Mashu tzrach livroach achar kach mipachad Izevel, the fact that he had to run away, Eliyahu had to run away from Jezebel after this, he says, I think, Hayak kapara ahakravato bebama. It was actually his penance for giving a korban, a sacrifice, on a bama, on a private altar, rather than in the Mishkan. Afal pi shaya b'dvar Hashem, even though God told him to do it. Now that I think is fascinating. It's like, put that in your Akedah pipe and smoke it, right? Like I'm saying, like just imagine that. It's like, oh, let's say Avram went through with it, but then he'd have to be punished for, there's a lot there. But what I think is important is that in some ways this does anticipate an approach to dirty hands that I think is very, very important. And that approach, Walzer has it here, but I actually want to make it a little bit more, I want to make it a little bit more robust, right? What Walzer does here, or robust for my purposes, what Walzer does here is he says, all right, let's look at the long history of what people do about dirty hands in politics. You know you did something wrong, right? And yet you had to do it. So the first tradition says, Machiavelli, the ends justify the means, and that's where we are, right? The second tradition is, you feel bad. You're a tragic hero. Okay, you feel bad. But the third I'm most intrigued by. So let's read that together in number 11. On page 11, sorry. Okay, when it says the third tradition. The third tradition that I want to examine, Albert Camus' The Just Assassins, which I have not read, so I can't tell you more about it. The heroes of this play are terrorists at work in 19th century Russia. The dirt on their hands is human blood. And yet Camus' admiration for them, he tells us, is complete. We consent to being criminals, one of them says, but there is nothing with which anyone can reproach us. Here is the dilemma of dirty hands in a new form. The heroes are innocent criminals, just assassins, because having killed, they are prepared to die and will die. That last part is the important part, right? Having killed, they are prepared to die and will die. Only their execution by the same despotic authorities they are attacking will complete the action in which they are engaged. Dying, they need make no excuses. That is the end of their guilt and pain. The execution is not so much punishment as self-punishment and expiation. On the scaffold, they wash their hands clean, and unlike the suffering servant, they die happy. Now, the argument of the play, when presented in so radically simplified a form, may seem a little bizarre, and perhaps it is marred by the moral extremism of Camus' politics. Political actions has limits, he says, in a preface to the volume containing The Just Assassins. And there is no good and just action but what recognizes those limits, and if it must go beyond them, at least accepts death. I am less interested here in the violence of what that at least. What else does he have in mind? Then in the sensible doctrine, it exaggerates. The doctrine might be best described by an analogy. Just assassination, I want to suggest, is like civil disobedience. In both, human beings violate a set of rules, go beyond a moral or legal limit, in order to do what they believe they should do. At the same time, they acknowledge their responsibility for the violation by accepting punishment or doing penance. I am nevertheless inclined to think Camus' view the most attractive of the three, if only because it requires us at least to imagine a punishment or a penance that fits the crime, and so to examine closely the nature of the crime. The others do not require that. Once he has launched his career, the crimes of Machiavelli's prince seem subject only to prudential control. And the crime of Weber's tragic hero are limited only by his capacity for suffering, and not, as they should be, by our capacity for suffering. So when I read this, here's what I see. I see Walzer's argument, and then I see an argument that I want to make. Walzer's argument, it seems, is that if you're willing to accept punishment for getting your hands dirty, then that is the best version rather than pretending your hands are not dirty or just, poor me, tragic hero, suffering. Now, this example is a little bit insane, right? Meaning, I'm serious. It's a little bit, it's an extreme example. But what he's basically saying is if you are willing to live with the consequences of your actions, knowing that those are consequences of your actions, then that is at least something in terms of having to get your hands dirty. Now, the argument that I want to make is somewhat different, which is I think that this third approach, what's attractive about it to me is a recognition that that we are doing something wrong. And then I want to know what we're going to do about it. I do not think that it's enough to have some metaphysical punishment or some bad, consequences? That's the word I was looking for. But not even just guilt, but even to accept bad consequences. I think we actually have to do more. And I think it's going to feel a little bit hypocritical, which is I think that when we get our hands dirty and we recognize that our hands are dirty, we need to figure out some way outside of where our hands need to be dirty to work to help the issue that we're actually either ignoring or being problematic about. So I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to go back to Cuomo, okay? Because it's easy for me to give a real example, right? And I think we're going to talk about real examples if people are up for that. I think it's worth talking about real examples. Okay, are you ready for something that will shock a lot of you and not shock any of you? I was going to rank Cuomo. Okay? I thought Lander was a thrown-away vote, and I thought Mamdani was a vote I couldn't cast, and Cuomo is a sexual harasser, and I'm a proud feminist. That, at no point, and I didn't get to do it because of Iran, so my ballot never came, okay? Kach ha'chaim, such is life. And by the way, if I get to vote in the election, I will vote against whoever will beat Mamdani. I don't care if they're owned by Turkey, literally whoever will beat Mamdani. You can disagree with me, you don't have to clap, you can totally disagree with me. I'm sharing. My hands will be dirty. My hands would have been dirty if I made that vote. I would have said to myself, I mean this honestly, is there something I can do to, support sexual harassment victims, work, give money to an NGO, lobby to have tighter controls over his interactions with different people? Meaning, at no point did I find that it was okay for me to just cast that ranking. It was, okay, my hands are dirty, and now what is my responsibility? And it will be the same thing if it comes to Adams or Sliwa or Cuomo again, right? I'm serious, meaning it'll be the same thing. And so I want to give that as an example, and I think part of what's so alluring is it's alluring for people to say, I never have to get my hands dirty. Whether you align with the right or you align with the left, your hands are going to be dirty right now. Whether it's, I think, you're going to disagree with me in a minute, right? Okay, 1 second, we're gonna do. But I think that to be able to figure out how do I determine the parameters of how I make sure I don't become whatever it is what I think is the problem. How do I make sure that I don't lie about what Judaism is, even engaging in realpolitik? What are my limits in terms of how dirty I will get my hands and in which directions To me, these are very important questions for us to be asking ourselves, and I think they're very concerning questions. I want to go back to transactional leadership, transactional allyship, which is essentially to say we can choose to what extent and in what ways we are allying with whom at different times. This is not an all or nothing proposition, and it can't be an all or nothing proposition. So as much as I'm not voting for Mamdani, I think it is critical for Jewish leaders to be meeting with Mamdani now and talking about Zionism with him. I think it would be a huge mistake to sit here with everybody's hands up in the air. How is it possible? Right? Are you an idiot? This is political alliance. Go make your political alliance. Right? Doesn't mean I have to vote for him. I think it would be insane if there is a Republican congressperson in your district who wants to come support the Jewish community, not somebody who is, the author of ICE. You understand? Right? There are limits. But it would be insane to say, nah, we don't need you. Right? Meaning, these are the questions that I think we need to be asking ourselves. And as hard as it was to be purple, and some of the people in this room have purple synagogues, as hard as it was to be purple, I actually think it's essential to be purple right now to a certain degree, because you can speak honestly about the fact that everybody here knows that no one side is actually going to save them, right? There are aspects about each side that are deeply concerning and aspects about each side that you might feel you need, right? Something like that. So I am going to end with, how's everybody doing? I'll find out in the Q&A. I'll find out. It's fine. I told you I was nervous about this, but I really mean it. This is why I'm doing it. I could come here and entertain you, but that's not, I hope I'm being a little entertaining also. Yeah, right? Okay. I think I made a Brit Milah joke. I'm not sure if that was so entertaining. Okay. I was like cringing in myself, but that's the example in the Gemara. Okay. I think this is really important. So Trude Weiss Rosmarin in number 15. Did anybody get to it? If you got to it, raise your hand. Okay. First of all, she's amazing. She's amazing. Do people know about Trude Weiss Rosmarin? She's flippin' amazing. I am a fan girl forever now of hers. So she gives this talk in 1953. And basically what she's trying to engage is the suggestion that people are making American Jewry is just like Babylonian Jewry. Like they created the Talmud, we'll create something amazing also. And she's like, nope. You're more like Alexandrian Jewry, the Jewry of Philo. Let's see why. Number 15, in attempting an analogy between American Jewry and Jewish groups of the past, the Jewries of Babylonia, Muslim Spain, and Eastern Europe do not satisfy the standards of resemblance and likeness on which such a comparison must be based. Those Jewries never attained full and equal citizenship. They never regarded themselves or were regarded as part and parcel of the body politic of their respective countries. They were strangers in strange lands. Indeed, they prayed for the welfare of the countries that sheltered them, but they did not love them as their own countries. They did not love the countries of their sojourn as the American Jew loves with all their heart and soul their cherished country, America. There is then no resemblance at all between American Jewry and the centers of Jewish gravity of the past. But there is a close resemblance between American Jewry and Alexandrian Jewry of 2,000 years ago, and German Jewry of the post-Mendelssohnian period. Like American Jewry, which is not merely in America, but fully a part of America, Alexandrian Jewry and German Jewry were unreservedly integrated with their respective majority groups and cultures. Now, I think this is a really good point that she's making. And she's using the point for something else. She's using the point for how difficult it's going to be to maintain Jewish particularism in America because American Jews feel American through and through. But I actually think that what's underlying this whole conversation this morning is the question of whether we can see ourselves as Jews first. And I'll say what I mean by that. Seeing ourselves as Jews first means we don't just fall into the American political polarization landscape. We say to ourselves, we have a home, we stand for something. Sometimes that something fits in neatly, and sometimes that something doesn't fit in so neatly, right? In some ways, that's what I'm asking. How do we make sure that we don't just get swept up with whatever the partisanship of the day is, but we actually say to ourselves, how are we going to maintain our values as Jews? Those values that are pushing us in the name of supporting democracy and protecting the vulnerable, and those values that are pushing us in the direction of protecting Israel and caring about our fellow Jews overseas in that way. So I'd like to pause there, and thank you very much. Okay, so am I supposed to call on people? Okay, so I will. Okay, so this side of the boat is like tipping over. You've had something to say for a while, and I definitely want to hear it. And I think, Aaron, your hand had been up for a while as well. So let's go for it. Thank you so much, Nama. This is like the Hasidic story with, and Risha, you'll correct me, the Hasidic story where the Rebbe comes and says, oh, I'm gonna be the wagon driver, and my wagon driver is gonna go in and give the talk. And then the wagon driver goes in and gives the talk, and people are like, wow, this is amazing. And he goes, you should meet my wagon driver. So Rabbi Nama Levitz Applebaum carrying the microphone kind of feels like that. Thank you very much. Yes, you should meet our microphone carrier and hear what she has to say in life. Yes.
So,
can you remind everybody your name?
yeah, I'm Sammy Barth.
Sammy.
From Brooklyn, near HaKodesh. So,
Which part? Depends.
not so Kodesh. So, and going back to the kind of balance between, or kapara, you'd vote for Cuomo and send a donation to some organization dealing with amelioration of sexual harassment.
Makes it sound pretty pathetic, right? I know.
So the question is, imagine that your vote was the vote that tipped it, which you should always imagine when you're going to vote, that because of you, it would really come to be.
Yes.
Were New York in a little bubble of its own, and everything else that was going on in America wasn't going on, although I might differ, I would have significant sympathy with the outlook that you describe. But to the extent that it seems to me and to others that the argument that she made in 1953 about Jews in America, in the last year, that seems to be completely falling apart. It would seem to me that to take the risk of putting somebody in place that could enable or facilitate the forces, I believe, are forces of true evil that are magnifying in America, and to imagine that even if you send half of your salary for the whole year, which wouldn't be a trivial thing, even if you made a tremendous korban, a sacrifice as a result of it, in what framework, in the particularly complex, unbelievably complex, interwoven nexus that we find ourselves, how then do we act?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I completely understand if someone makes a different decision than I do. I would see that as a much bigger problem, actually, with Adams, because I think Adams is a bit of a foot soldier for Trump, and he'll fold right when Trump asks him not to be a sanctuary city and all that. Cuomo, I don't think, is actually going to do that. I think Cuomo's bigger issue is that he's not a great guy. You know, yes, he already did that. So I think actually the bigger question is about Adams, if we're actually going to go there. And I think I'm glad that I have time before I get to that issue. But this is the reason why I gave you Churchill and Stalin. Meaning, the reason why I gave you Churchill and Stalin is because I think sometimes there are two bad choices, and you have to decide what you're going to prioritize. And I'd prioritize for the state of New York, I would prioritize the safety of Jewish Zionists and the coffers of New York that have so much of a connection to Israel, such a connection to Israel. I would prioritize that right now. Then the question is, what does happen if immigration, ICE comes to New York? Then what's my responsibility, right? If ICE comes to New York, my hands are dirty for that. If Adams is the one who allows it, and I voted for Adams. And the question is, do I hide people in my house? What do I do, right? Those are fair questions. But I'd rather be honest about what I'm choosing and why I'm choosing it than pretend that I'm not making a choice. You know what I'm saying? And that I'm not responsible for that choice. I am responsible for that choice. And by the way, the anti-Semitism that comes with it. I know that too, right? I know that too. Okay, now we got more questions on this side. Aaron, your hand was up before. And just tell everyone where you're from and stuff. Oh, sorry.
How about now?
Yes.
Hey, hi everyone. Aaron Finkelstein from Lakeview, Chicago. Two maybe related questions back to kind of both about the home and the coalition. And I'm going to push back on your reading of Rebbe a little bit.
Great.
Well, reading this Gemara, I didn't think it was such a critique of him. And I honestly think that the addition of the Onkelos narrative, like Rebbe's functioning in the coalition, and Onkelos is functioning in the home, because that's what converts on some level are. They're people that are like coming into the home in the fullest sense. And I think the rabbis there are sort of armchair historians being like, taking potshots at Rebbe, because they can, but they're not in the arena. They're not having to deal. They're just critiquing it from the side. So like, I actually read it pretty fairly of like, yeah, it wasn't perfect, but like, he did a lot of good. Okay, his hands are a little dirty. And I think so that's sort of one point and question. My other question is, at least in my experience, I feel like I'm in a congregational context, and my shul, I think people want it to be a home, but it's feeling more and more like a coalition. And what happens when homes become coalitions, and I guess like the implication of that is, what does it say when we're basically asking our people to, like, are they really friends or are they just transactional? And I'll give an example. Like, I have somebody on my board who has said, like, who's very left, and they're like, yeah, I go to a diverse shul, and like, I think it's amazing that like I can go to a shiva of somebody who like voted for Trump. That's our relationship, and it's sort of a transactional relationship, but it's sort of not. So, a lot there.
Wow. Okay. So two things. First of all, I think your read of Rebbe is perfectly legitimate. I think there's even a different way to read this, which is Onkelos is unlikely, Rebbe's unlikely, try to be something in the middle. Right? Like, what do you mean? You're just not going to go? The Roman emperor is calling for you and you're just not going to go? What are you talking about? Right? You also might look at Onkelos and say, well, you're a convert, and actually if you had gone, then maybe you could have taught the Roman. Right. Oh, right. Meaning there's a little bit of it's a little bit too perfect, right? It's a little bit too perfect. You might also argue that Rebbe's relationship is a little too perfect. The only thing that where I differ with you on that is twofold. Number one, and Sigalit and I were talking about this, one is the other times where Rebbe is portrayed with Antoninus, you just don't get that subversiveness at all. And here it's like, it's dripping. He literally uses Esav's verbiage in Aramaic. Eat li tuva, yesh li rav. Like that's for a whole parable that's about Esav versus Yaakov, Rome versus Israel, so to speak. It's a strange thing, right? But I think it's totally legitimate. And, the more I look at this Gemara, the more I think the more I look at this Gemara, the angrier I get at Rebbe because of the world that we're living in. Like, I actually think I read it through that Rorschach, and I'm like, how could you pretend that Judaism would allow such a thing? Like, that's wrong. It's just really, really, really wrong. You're bartering our Judaism for a meal with the emperor, because I also don't see him doing so much for the Jews in this passage. In terms of shul as a home and a coalition and not a home, I do think it's interesting to ask for what things is shul a home, and for what things is shul a coalition. And I think we might have to make that distinction. And I know that sometimes people say, oh, it's a cop-out, you're not going to say anything about the issues of the day. Are there parts of shul that are supposed to be a home, where it's supposed to be, well, the things that we actually share? And are there parts of shul that actually, well, wait a second, this is coalition stuff, and therefore this one might not feel comfortable? And can you differentiate between the two and still have room for the different opportunities, but to be able to actually frame them in that way? I think that's really interesting. All right, we're going to zigzag. Your hand's been up for a while, sir. Hi. What's your name?
Hi, my name's Rick Block. We live in Jerusalem and in Palo Alto.
Oh, nice.
In Rome and Jerusalem.
Did you say in Rome?
Rome and Jerusalem.
In Rome and
Yeah,
Jerusalem.
yeah.
I love that.
I want to react to Rosemary, and I and then make a comment about Camus. I didn't hear the whole speech, and I agree that what you've given us is brilliant. But there's something else that is in common with Alexandrian Jewry and German Jewry, and could potentially be true of American Jewry. Those did not end well. Nor, in fact, did Babylonian Jewry or Muslim Spain or Eastern Europe. None of them ended well.
Correct.
And the question then is, speaking as a Jew, as an American and an Israeli, from the American perspective, what is our strategy for assuring that our end is different than those? Because the question is that actually attainable? And I think the jury is out. Just want to say about Camus, I was shocked when I read that text because
Which one?
the third
Camus.
tradition.
Yeah.
Isn't that Hamas?
I don't think so.
They kill and they're willing to die happily. Isn't that Hamas?
I don't think they think they're doing anything wrong. Right? Meaning it might be, it might be Yigal Amir. It might be Yigal Amir. No, but if he thought that he was a Rodef, meaning, here's what I'll say.
If you're willing to die for your cause and you'll die happily,
yes,
then that supersedes all moral
But time out, two different things. In terms of Camus, first of all, let's just be clear. The concept of dirty hands, the doctrine of dirty hands is very, very, very dangerous. It's very dangerous. Avir al-Ishma, very dangerous. These are very, very dangerous concepts, right? Which is why we don't like to talk about them, right? But what Camus is saying is he's talking about people who think they're doing wrong, but they have to do it, and they'll die happily because they're being punished for what they did, right? That is very different from people who say, I'm a martyr, and it's, I have terrible blood on my hands, and I don't deserve to be here anymore, right? That's like a whole different psychological problem, right? But I do think it's important to recognize how troubling the whole concept is. I'm just bringing it to a bunch of really thoughtful people and see what we do with it. I'm serious. I don't know the way out. I don't know the way out, okay? And in terms of all of our experiences, whether in the land of Israel or outside of it, have ended at some point, whether in the land of Israel or outside of it, have ended at some point. I actually think that I think it's important to live with the humility of not really knowing how our story ends and of doing the best that we can to make it end as best as it can. And I think part of the best that we can, people are going to have different views of what that is. I think for some people, the best that we can is leaning into Judaism and Jewishness, leaning into the covenant between God and the Jewish people, that is part of the best that we can. I think for some people, the best that we can is we must strengthen democracy, because in the long term, it's the only thing that's going to make the difference between this experience and many of our other experiences. I think some people think the best that we can is get in good with the king so that the king will protect us. So I think there's a lot of arguing over what the best that we can do is. And I think that's part of why we all want to be able to say something about it, because what are we going to do? But I also think that it's very important to live with the humility that we don't actually know. And yet we'll do the best that we can, but we don't actually know. In the back, black shirt, glasses.
Hi there. My name is Maytal. I'm from Vancouver, Canada.
Hi.
So the piece I think that felt a little bit missing for me in your discussion around Mamdani specifically, and actually I think maybe around all of this, is strategy, and also strategy when we're in a position of power. Because I think that when you look at the situation, the way that you're describing two things, the way that you're describing what you could do if Cuomo were to win in terms of making donations, et cetera, you're, I think, falsely setting yourself up as like not having power in that situation. But the same if Mamdani were to win as a Jewish community, specifically a Jewish community in New York. I mean, look how much I from Vancouver, Canada know about your Democratic mayoral primaries.
Right.
There's immense power there. And I thought it was very telling when Mamdani and Lander were on Stephen Colbert, and Mamdani was quoting the hostage families. there's an acknowledgement there that he needs to listen to the Jewish community, and there's an acknowledgement of that because not only do we have power, relative power in the diaspora, we can oftentimes be very strategic about it, and we
Yes.
see it working in that case probably even more than in the Cuomo example with, say, feminists, Jewish or not, and his, continued actions. And then when we go to the Weiss-Rosemarin example, that's also a place where the differentiator probably of American Jewry from the other examples is that political power or proximity to power. And I'm just wondering if you feel that the calculation changes, maybe specifically with Mamdani, though with all of these texts and how we think about, the thing that's missing from all of this is the fact that it's talking about Jewish life, Judaism, and Jewishness when we were lacking power and lacking political power and lacking strategic power. I'm wondering if any of these calculations change, either for you or more broadly how the texts are interpreted, because we are in such a different time right now.
I really appreciate that. So it's interesting. We just relaunched my podcast, Texting, and literally last week. And what we're trying to do is deal with the dilemmas of American Jews right now. And the first person that I invited to be a guest on the podcast is Jacob Feinsman, who's the head of Jews United for Justice in DC, a major community organizer, progressive activist, in order to actually get the expertise of someone who's in that world, because that's not my expertise. The way that I would say what I'm talking about applies to a strategic and powerful Jewish community is that we still have to make choices as a strategic and powerful Jewish community where we are going to put our eggs in which baskets, how we are going to frame our alliances, how deep those alliances are going to go, and how critical and self-critical we can be on an ongoing basis to see how they're going. So I truly appreciate you adding in that language. It's not my lane, but 100% I'm trying to have conversations with people for whom that is their lane, because they're not thinking as an individual voter like I am. They're thinking as, okay, we are community organizers. So to an extent, because I have a religious leadership voice in New York, I have conversations with colleagues about how do we have discussions with the mayoral candidates about XYZ, for sure. But I wouldn't consider myself like a big motivator of those. It's more like something that I grab onto, but 100%. And then I would look at these sources and say, so how do organizers make their decisions around these things? Really, really appreciate that, Maytel. Thank you. Okay, we're going to keep flipping back and forth in the back. Can I ask you at kangaroos?
Say that again?
Kangaroo print?
It's leopards, I think.
It's leopards?
Yeah.
That is literally why I called on you.
Oh, great.
That is awesome.
That's great. Thank you.
My husband has a shirt with the print is golf carts. And like people like stare at him, like they're talking to him and they're like, he's like, golf carts. They're golf carts. Stop staring at me. They're golf carts.
leopards.
Okay, what's your name?
I'm Ben.
Hi, Ben.
I live just outside New York, so I don't get a vote. My question, so I want to come back to something that's sort of not related to politics. It's sort of something you've said a couple of times, which is that you're willing to be in an ally relationship with someone so long as you don't, your red line is like lying about what Judaism is. And I guess I have two questions about that. The first question is, I guess the presumption there is that you're not allowed to lie to your allies. For me, I just am curious, you can respond to one or both of these questions. The first part is like, I think the rabbis pretty emphatically decide that truth-telling is only a contingent value, not an absolute value, in like a variety of ways. So why can't we lie to our allies, I guess? And the second part of the question is maybe a harder question, which I think about a lot, I guess, and I'm curious what you say. I think for me, the most compelling way to read like the whole history of Stadlanut in like the post-Enlightenment West is precisely Jews lying about what Judaism is, and like the bargain that Jews make with, I think, disastrous consequences, like objectively. for the last 300 years is that Judaism is like primarily a religion, because then it doesn't pose a threat to loyalty and doesn't make completing claims, which like is nonsense. And like, I think. And like, if anyone, like probably people have read Leora Butnitzky's book about how Judaism became religion. It's not the only thing said about that, but it's an important
But it's
thing.
a great book.
It's a great book, and then very important. And so I guess where that leaves me is like not terribly sanguine about allyship in the diaspora,
Yeah.
at least not in the terms that you
Yeah.
describe. So I'm wondering, like, can we think of examples of Jewish communities in the modern West that didn't try to make that bargain, whether or not they thought they were lying? Like, I'm not sure that Mendelssohn thought he was lying.
Right.
He might have, actually, because he was
Right.
like
What's
kind of firm.
conscious and what's subconscious.
But
yeah.
like, I definitely think people like.
Yeah.
When someone like Hirsch, like she makes that claim, I don't know if he is explicitly in part of that conversation, but when he would make that claim,
Yeah.
I think he would be lying.
So first of
So-
all, what I love, Ben, what I love about what you're doing, the goal of this talk is not, here's the map. The goal of this talk is let's actually go on the journey, right? I'm offering you what thus far I've been thinking of as my map, and I learn more and more as I speak with people. I think to an extent, I'm not saying you can't lie to allies. I'm saying misrepresenting Judaism is a problem. I find that misrepresenting Judaism is a problem, and if you have to misrepresent Judaism, that is a form of dirty hands as well. Meaning, Judaism is supposed to stand for things, it's supposed to matter, and even if I have to make compromises, I shouldn't make it seem like Judaism says those things are all right. And I actually agree with you that there are disastrous consequences for that. Now, maybe I'm impacted by Mital's point. Maybe I feel we are strong, strategic people. I can afford not to lie about what Judaism says. This is not Napoleon bringing in a bunch of rabbis to see if Jews were going to be able to get rights, and it hinges on whether I'm going to lie about Judaism or I'm not going to lie about Judaism. I just find that the perversion that I see of Judaism either into anti-Zionism or Trumpism is so highly problematic that I have recognized it as these things to me are major, major red lines. They are, like, how do you make sense of anything if you don't believe in Jewish collective life? How do you make sense of anything in Judaism? Just open a siddur. Like, literally, how do you make sense of anything? How do you make sense of a man who will arrest a 6-year-old with leukemia and pretend that that's Judaism? No. So I'm trying to figure out a way not to do what I would call ziyuf haTorah, not to do what I would call forgery of Torah. Now, might that get me into trouble? Sure, but I'm not going to tell someone that they're going to Olam Haba. If I'm living in a democracy, I'm not going to tell somebody that they're going to Olam Haba if they're murdering people every day. I might lobby them for things that I need. I might thank them for things that they do for me, but I'm not going to lie to them and say that what they're doing is right? Like that, these are the things that I have trouble with. And I'm going to say the same thing on the left. I'm not going to make excuses for people who literally want to shut down 501c3 status from synagogues because they sell things from beyond the green line. I'm not going to pretend, it's okay. It's not okay. It's not okay. And I'm not going to pretend that Judaism condones that. I'm not going to pretend that's in the interest of justice. Anybody here ever visit Efrat? That's over the green line, right? I'm just saying that I just find that our propensity for just squeezing whatever we feel like out of Judaism in times when it's politically convenient to do so is highly problematic, and I think it ends poorly every time. I agree with that for a reason. I hope that was helpful. And whew, I'm gonna take a nap after this. Yes. Hi, you. Yes. And I'm really being very random. It's not like, oh, I don't want to hear from this person. I really am trying to be very random. Yes.
Hi, I'm Jerry Robbins from Boston.
Jerry?
And this is going to sound horribly oversimplistic, and
That's
so I'm
fine.
apologizing in advance.
Yeah.
But one of the things that Stephen and I were talking about is this idea of sometimes we get our hands dirty for good things. Like, you can't plant a seed without getting dirty. you can't clean something up without getting dirty. And so I'm curious about sometimes is there a way to turn the getting our hands dirty into something positive without also committing an Averah?
I mean, look, it depends what you mean, right? If getting your hands dirty means, roll up your sleeves and work on this, that's one thing. But if it means, look, I have to be more concerned about X, even though I know that Y is also going to happen, which is certainly a moral concern of mine, but it's not the top of my priority list. To me, that's a hands dirty that I shouldn't ignore, and I should recognize the catch-22. I should recognize what's going on and ask myself, are there ways that I can help? Is it a zero-sum game? Does it have to be this way, right? Like, can we do what Rebbe does at the beginning? Hand somebody the dove and put somebody in charge and tell them to release the dove, right? Like, are there ways to do those things? These are all, it's very creative, right? To Aaron's point, it's a much more creative passage than necessarily I'm giving it credit for, right? Like, so there's more to it. I just don't want to whitewash things that are wrong. I want to be honest about sometimes being in a situation where you have to do things that are wrong. Either wrong for this value or wrong for that value, because that's where we are to an extent. And it's nice when they all line up, but they don't always line up. Dan.
Hi, Dan Levin, Boca Raton. So one of the things that I'm seeing in my community and in sort of North American non-Orthodox Judaism generally is this new phenomenon where people prioritize being in line with the moral judgment of their allies than loyalty to people and family. So one of the things that I thought was interesting in the sources you chose is it was talking a lot about friendship, but it didn't talk about people. It didn't talk about family. And one of the things that I'm starting to see is when people are willing to let go of their people because of an immoral or dirty hands question. So when we prefer to choose our allies because of the moral questions that implicate family or people or nation.
Yeah.
And what happens when people think that staying with my people or my family makes my hands too dirty? And I think we're starting to see, I can speak about the reform movement a little bit, where you're starting to see people say, I'm going to choose my moral allies and I'm willing to forego my people because I can't stand with them on the moral questions.
Yeah. I don't think it's very simple. Oh, that's great. I think the question of kinship ethics, I assume when you talk about your people, you mean Jewish peoplehood, right? So I think the question of kinship ethics is an important one for our time. I think it is very hard living in a globalized world for people to consider kinship ethics as something ethical rather than just, I don't know, like saving your own skin or sort of self-interest. I think even the concept of enlightened self-interest, I think, feels dirty to people now. And part of my question is, I guess I have two directions for this. One is, do we continue to play into the zero-sum game of you have to choose one or the other? Or are there actually people, because again, we do live in a global society. We don't just live in the American bubble either, right? Are there people in Israel who are actually doing the work that you care about morally, who you can actually be connected with because you have similar values? And that's not something where you're choosing one or the other. You're actually choosing those who are in your people, who are with you. And then I think the second is it actually possible to have kinship ethics these days? Is it actually possible to talk to people about the fact that the Jews have ridden together throughout history, and chances are we're going to keep riding together for a very long time, and that actually has an ethical responsibility that's attached to it? I think it's a hard one, and it requires taking like a really hard look at Jewish history, and maybe an uncomfortable look at Jewish history. But I do think it's something worth talking about. I really do think it's something worth talking about.
I just want to let everybody know that we've gotten word from the kitchen that lunch is not quite ready, so we have a couple more minutes for questions.
Woo woo! See, that's always nice when people are cheering when lunch is not ready. Or that one person who everyone's like, what is wrong with you? I'm so hungry, I have to get out of here. Okay, you have had your hand up for so long. It's great to see you.
Stephen Reen from the other Alexandria, not the one that's 2,000 years old.
That's right.
But
From
Alexandria,
the
Virginia.
new Neo-Alexandria.
That's right. So I'm curious on your take. You mentioned in the story of Rebbe and Onkelos that Onkelos was expressing Judaism's care for human beings, the role of the leader to guard the little guy. But what if Onkelos was also utilitarian? That really what he was realizing was one day there'll be a new emperor that doesn't know Joseph, and we're going to need a Jewish army. And by converting all these Roman soldiers, we're going to have what to protect ourselves.
So interesting, Stephen, because I thought where you were going to go is what if he was being utilitarian? He's talking to a bunch of people who the Roman emperor sent to Nowheresville, ice storms, probably not ice storms, right? Freezing desert at night just to bring this guy in. And he says, hey, you guys are little guys, right? Guess what? Roman emperor doesn't care about the little guy. Judaism cares about the little guy, right? What if you were just doing what Ben said, right? Like, this is what Judaism is on one foot. Judaism is not your emperor, right? It's a great read. I don't know, right? I don't know. I've been too pie in the sky about Onkelos because I'm so busy being annoyed at Rebbe. No, I'm serious. I think there's something to that. This is why I learn with people. Like, meaning you learn from people. That's the point. I'm not sure. I want to think more about Onkelos. I want to think more.
I mean, in
I
a
love
way,
that.
that's the state of Israel. We can't just ally with the world and not have who to protect ourselves.
So it's an interesting question, right? Meaning when I was talking, Yehuda Kurtzer and I were talking about this, where I said, I actually want to talk about transactional allyship more. That's where I think American Jews need to think about, and Canadian Jews, and all Jews, and da-da-da, and all humans, da-da-da-da, that we need to think about transactional alliances more. He says, so you think we should be more like Israel? So I was like, what do you mean by that? He said, well, think about it. The early Zionist thinkers, right? Like, they made alliances with some pretty bad folk because they needed to. And also, even as a state, you may, and then people ask questions, and Meital, this is like the next layer of, do states have different ethical responsibilities than communities or than individuals, right? There's all of these things. I think this is a big spool of yarn that I'm willing to unravel, but it's going to take some time. Thank you for adding to my thinking, and everybody's thinking. Gail.
I'm just going to add one more read of Rebbe and Onkelos, and I have to attribute this to Andrea from our Chavruta.
That's
is not
amazing.
Originally my idea.
I love
But
that.
she noted the difference between when leaders talk to each other and what kind of relationship they can have, and when individuals or like people sort of more from the talk to each other. And there's a way in which individuals talking to each other is a much bigger threat to the entire political order, because Onkelos can bring over all the Roman soldiers when he talks to them one-on-one, which is a threat in some ways, most particularly perhaps to someone like Antoninus, maybe also to Rebbe too, but maybe also Rebbe sees, if you threaten the entire Roman Empire, that's ultimately, it might be good on the, in the moment when Onkelos converts those people, but in the broad scheme of things, that could be really dangerous.
Wow.
Right? When the little people get together and maybe,
so-
change the whole relationship.
Right. So what's the theory? I also want to point out you are wearing a shirt that says I work for Big Talmud, which
I do teach Talmud.
I
so
need a copy. I need that shirt. Is
Daf
what I'm basically
reactions,
saying.
everybody.
Great, amazing. I need that shirt. Speaking of other shirts that either I or my husband need. So I think, so when I was talking to Jacob Feinspan, he said to me, I asked him a question, like when we were prepping, and he says, do you want me to talk about myself as an individual and the relationships that I have, or myself when I'm representing the interests of my organization? Right? Because he's like, when I'm representing the interests of my organization, I have much more rigid guidelines. And when I'm just myself, of course I'm much more malleable. It's just very, very different, right? And in some ways it kind of threatens to break down. Right, so these are all these people who do peace initiatives by bringing people together, right? And the question of whether the ground up, the bottom up stuff, does it ever actually penetrate fully? Like, can you actually get that? But I love that. And Andrew, I love that. It's so interesting. So interesting. In the back, Diet Coke. So really, your parents were bold.
Yeah. Diet Coke fruit handler, actually.
Diet Coke what?
My last name is Fruit Handler. I imagine being Diet Coke fruit handler is making my day, actually.
That, by the way, Diet Coke fruit handler.
Yeah.
That could be a new
Jason
Tom.
Fruit, Jason Fruit Handler, Long Island, Woodbury, New York. I was wondering, it didn't seem like an accident to me that Rabbi Yehuda Nassi's relationship with the emperor happens in private, and the Onkelos story happens, I mean, you can't bring a legion of soldiers and not attract attention. And I'm wondering about how the private public nature of where your dirty hands are and the way in which you're able or unable to telegraph the nuance that you are trying to draw affects your decision making.
Yeah, who was it who said, maybe it was Aaron, maybe you also said it, that we said we're so busy judging. We're so busy judging what they're doing, and we don't even always know what they're doing, right? Whoever the they is, it's really interesting. I think there's a point to it. I think in those moments in those public moments, I think those public moments are very, very important, especially for misrepresenting Judaism. I think those public moments are very important. And I think there are so many private moments that we don't even know about. I think we'd be like shocked and angered by knowing that they happened, even if they helped us in the long run. So I'll give you an example. My brother-in-law, and some people have probably heard me tell this story, my brother-in-law was working for a firm that was working on an amicus brief. It had something to do with religious protections. I don't remember exactly what the details were. So a few weeks after October 7th. And on the amicus brief, there was both AJC and CARE. They were both on the amicus brief together. And my brother-in-law and his Muslim colleague, who are good friends, the colleague basically said to him, like, I'm going to talk to CARE, and whoever the AJC wants to talk to, they'll talk to. CARE didn't want to talk to my brother-in-law. They weren't interested in being in the conversation. He wasn't like, oh, I'm not doing this then. He's like, okay, this is a religious freedoms case. We got to take it on. We're going to do it, right? But he wasn't going out and being like, hey, everybody, I just want you to know a few weeks after October 7th, this is the AJC and CARE are working on something together. Like, yeah, and they were, and probably to the benefit of everybody. You know what I mean? Like, those things, and this is why I love JCRC people. I have like an unhealthy obsession with JCRC people because I find they're like the spies among us, or like the superheroes among us, because they know all the issues, they know all the concerns, they know all the worry about guilt by association and strengthening different groups, and they also know that, especially in local politics, there are things that you got to get done, right? So the public-private, I think, is really important. I want to name another moment that people will either, I don't know what you're going to think. I don't know what any of you are thinking. Why am I like pretending you're all going to hate me after this? Look, I'm honest, at least that. We can say that. I try not to misrepresent what I think, even if you disagree with what I think, right? Like, at least I'm trying to be honest and trying to have a vulnerable conversation. I think that there were two examples to me of religious leadership at the Trump inauguration. I'm just going to say it. One was, what was the pastor's name? You remember her? She didn't speak at the inauguration. She spoke at the church service afterwards. Pastor Buddy, who, by the way, I emailed afterwards to thank her. Right? No, I'm saying who basically stood up and said, mercy on the vulnerable, right? And clearly at that moment lost any future audience with anyone in the administration, right? Meaning, but stood up for what was right. And Rabbi Ari Berman of Yeshiva University, who spoke at the inauguration and talked about the importance of everyone being safe and cared for in this democracy, okay? To me, these were two very different versions of people trying to represent whatever it is right? I think we see a lot of those two versions in a lot of different places. And I would say, I think in general, I think we need both. I'm just going to be out there. I think we need both. I think what we don't need is telling Antoninus he's going to heaven. You understand? Meaning, but I do actually think we need both. And I think one's hands are much dirtier than another's. I'm just being totally, totally frank. So I think before I get myself into more trouble, I am going to pause right here. Thank you all so much for an honest conversation. I appreciate you.